The deep space rescue vessel, Horizon, drifted silently through the outer edges of the solar system. Captain Tom Reed stood at the main viewport, his weathered face reflecting in the reinforced glass as he watched the distant stars. 20 years of space rescue operations had taught him that space was never truly quiet. There was always something out there, waiting to be found. "Captain, we're picking up something strange." The voice of his sensor operator, Jack, broke through the silence of the bridge. "It's like nothing I've seen before." Reed walked over to the sensor station, his magnetic boots clicking against the metal floor. The screen showed a massive energy disturbance, swirling like a hurricane in space. But what caught his attention were the tiny dots trapped within it. Ships, hundreds of them. "How did we miss this?" Reed asked, leaning closer to the screen. "The energy signature only became visible when we switched to the old radiation scanners, sir. The quantum sensors couldn't detect it at all." Jack adjusted some dials, bringing the image into sharper focus. "It's like the whole area is caught in some kind of quantum storm." Reed pressed the ship-wide comm button. "Chief Torres to the bridge." If anyone could make sense of this, it would be his engineering chief. Maria Torres arrived minutes later, her tool belt still hanging from her waist. She took one look at the sensor readings and whistled. "Well, that's not something you see every day." "Can you make sense of it?" Reed asked. Torres studied the data scrolling across the screen. "It's like a quantum dead zone. Any advanced technology would be useless in there." She pointed to the ships trapped inside. "Those vessels, they're probably running on nothing but backup systems, if they're running at all." Reed nodded slowly. "Life signs." "Thousands," Jack confirmed, "but their power signatures are weak. Whatever's keeping them there, it's draining their resources." The captain straightened up, his decision made. "Send out a broadband radio signal. Old style, nothing fancy. If their quantum communications are down, they might still pick up basic transmissions." For several tense minutes, they waited. Then, through the static, a voice crackled over the speakers. The language was strange, but the ship's basic translator could handle it. "Assistance required. Systems failing. Children aboard." Reed looked at his crew. "Well, looks like we found someone who needs saving. Torres, get your engineering team ready. We're going to need every trick in the book for this one." The next few hours were a flurry of activity. The Horizon moved closer to the edge of the quantum storm, careful not to get caught in its effect. Through patchy radio communications, they learned that the stranded ships belonged to a species called the Starborn, a highly advanced civilization that had never encountered humans before. "They're asking about our technology level," Jack reported, a hint of amusement in his voice. "I don't think they're impressed by what they're seeing." Reed allowed himself a small smile. "Tell them we may not have quantum drives or neural networks, but we've got something better. Good old-fashioned human ingenuity." Torres returned to the bridge with a preliminary rescue plan. "Their ships are trapped in a quantum field that their advanced systems can't handle, but our primitive technology might just be basic enough to work through it." "How many ships?" Reed asked. 342, Jack answered, "including what appears to be several of their colony vessels. They've got families aboard, Captain." Reed's expression grew serious. He'd done hundreds of rescues, but nothing on this scale. Yet, looking at his crew's determined faces, he knew they would find a way. Humans always did. "All right, let's show these Starborn what humanity can do." He turned to Torres. "Get me a rescue plan that works. Jack, maintain radio contact. Let them know help is coming." As his crew jumped into action, Reed looked back at the swirling quantum storm visible through the viewport. Inside that chaos were thousands of lives depending on them. The Starborn might have ships that could cross galaxies in days, but right now, their only hope was a human rescue vessel running on technology they'd probably considered obsolete. Sometimes, Reed thought, being primitive had its advantages. The first visual contact with the Starborn surprised everyone on the Horizon's bridge. The alien that appeared on their simple video display was tall and elegant, with silvery skin that seemed to shimmer like starlight. Admiral Vale, as the alien introduced itself, stood in what appeared to be a dimly lit command center. "Your offer of assistance is appreciated," Vale said through the translator, though the hesitation in their voice was clear. "Though I must ask about your technological capabilities. Our sensors indicate your vessel is using fossil fuel backup systems and analog communications." Captain Reed stood straighter, knowing this first impression would matter. "You're correct, Admiral. We believe those same outdated systems might be exactly what you need right now." Vale's expression shifted, the alien equivalent of raising an eyebrow. "Explain." Torres stepped forward. "Your ships are trapped because your quantum systems can't function in the storm. But our older technology doesn't rely on quantum mechanics. Sometimes the simplest solution is the best one." A commotion broke out behind Vale as another Starborn rushed into view. "Admiral, the primary life support systems on Colony Ship 3 just failed. They're running on emergency power only." Reed watched as Vale's proud demeanor cracked slightly. "How many aboard?" he asked. 800, Vale replied, "mostly children and elderly being transported to our new colony world." There was a pause. "We have perhaps 3 days of emergency power remaining." "Let us help," Reed said firmly. "Your ships may be more advanced than ours, but right now that advancement is working against you. We can do this." Vale studied them for a long moment. The Admiral's silver skin rippled with what might have been concern or contemplation. "Very well. What do you propose?" Torres pulled up a simple diagram on their screen. "We start with Colony Ship 3. We can use our backup power systems to supplement their life support. It won't be pretty, but it'll work." "Not pretty." Vale seemed confused by the phrase. "It means it won't be elegant," Reed explained. "We'll need to physically connect power cables, run emergency air systems, use manual overrides, but it will keep your people alive." The next hour was spent explaining their rescue plan. The Starborn engineers listened with a mixture of disbelief and growing respect as Torres outlined how they could adapt human technology to work with their systems. "Your species still maintains knowledge of these basic systems?" one of the Starborn engineers asked. "Of course," Torres replied. "Space is dangerous. We believe in having backups for our backups. Sometimes, the old ways are the most reliable." Vale's expression had changed from skepticism to cautious hope. "My people have not used such basic methods in generations. We may require your guidance." "That's why we're here," Reed said with a smile. "Humanity's first contact with your species might not be happening under the best circumstances, but we're honored to help." As they finished discussing the initial rescue plan, an alarm blared through the Starborn ship. Vale turned sharply, listening to a report from one of their crew. "The quantum storm is intensifying," Vale announced, tension clear in their voice. "Several more of our primary systems are failing." Reed looked at Torres, who nodded. "We need to move fast," she said. "Admiral Vale, we'll start with Colony Ship 3 and work our way through your fleet, but we'll need your people to trust us and follow our instructions exactly." Vale stood silent for a moment, clearly wrestling with pride and necessity. Finally, the Admiral bowed slightly. "We put ourselves in your hands, Captain Reed. Please, save our people." Reed nodded solemnly. "Prepare to receive our shuttle. Torres, gather your team. We've got work to do." As they ended the transmission, Jack spoke up from his station. "They really thought we couldn't help them at first, didn't they?" "Pride can be dangerous out here," Reed replied, watching his crew prepare for the rescue operation. "But sometimes it takes a crisis to remind us that advancement doesn't always mean forgetting the basics." The Horizon's shuttle bay doors opened, ready to launch their first rescue team. They had 3 days to save 800 lives. And that was just the beginning. But as Reed watched his crew move with practiced efficiency, he knew that humanity's primitive knowledge might just be exactly what the advanced Starborn needed to survive. Torres stood in the massive engine room of Colony Ship 3, surrounded by confused Starborn engineers. Their silver skin reflected the emergency lights, creating an ethereal glow in the dimly lit space. She held up an old-style mechanical pressure gauge, speaking through her translator. "Your quantum sensors are useless here, but this will tell us exactly how much air pressure we're working with," she explained. "Sometimes the simplest tools are the most reliable." The Starborn engineer named Bright watched her with fascination. "We haven't used physical gauges in over 100 years. Our systems were supposed to be perfect." Torres attached the gauge to a pipe with practiced ease. "Nothing in space is perfect. That's why we humans always have backup plans for our backup plans." Meanwhile, on the Horizon's bridge, Captain Reed and Admiral Vale were discussing the next phase of their rescue plan. Reed pointed to a holographic display showing the fleet's position within the quantum storm. "We've stabilized Colony Ship 3, Reed explained, "but we need to get everyone out of here before the storm gets worse. We're going to use modified mining tethers to pull ships out one by one." Vale's silvery features showed concern. "Mining tethers? Such primitive technology couldn't possibly move our ships." "Actually," Reed replied with a slight smile, "those primitive cables are rated to pull asteroids. Your ships might be advanced, but they still follow the basic laws of physics." Back in the engine room, Torres and her team were teaching the Starborn how to operate manual override systems. She had stripped down one of their complex control panels to reveal the basic mechanical systems underneath. "See this valve here?" she pointed. "If your quantum controls fail, you can turn it by hand. Sometimes the old ways are the best ways." A young Starborn engineer named Swift watched closely. "Our education never covered these basic principles. We were taught to rely on our advanced systems. Then consider this your crash course in Engineering 101, Torres said, handing them a wrench. "Today, you're going to learn how your ships really work." The rescue plan was coming together piece by piece. Human shuttles moved between the stranded ships, delivering supplies and setting up emergency systems. The Starborn were quick learners, their initial dismissal of human technology turning to genuine interest as they saw how effective these basic solutions could be. "It's fascinating," Bright said, helping Torres install a manual air recycler. "Your species chose to maintain knowledge of these fundamental systems even as you advanced." Torres nodded, tightening a bolt. "Space doesn't care how advanced you are. When things go wrong out here, you need to understand the basics of survival." On the bridge, Reed was coordinating the tether deployment. "We'll attach to the outer ships first," he explained to Vale. "Work our way inward in a spiral pattern. Each ship we pull out will reduce the storm's strength." Vale watched as the first tether shot out from the horizon, its simple metal cable glinting in the starlight. "To think, our salvation comes from technology we considered obsolete." "Not obsolete," Reed corrected gently. "Just fundamental. Sometimes you need to remember where you came from to know where you're going." The first tug on the tether was met with success. The outer ship moved slowly but surely toward the edge of the storm. Vale's crew watched in amazement as their supposedly superior engines, powerless in the quantum disruption, were overcome by simple mechanical force. "How long to evacuate the entire fleet?" Vale asked. Reed checked his calculations. 3 days if everything goes perfectly. 4 or 5 if we hit problems. And in space, we always hit problems." Vale finished, showing they were learning the human way of thinking. Torres reported in from Colony Ship 3. "Captain, we've got their life support stabilized. The Starborn engineers are picking up the basics quickly. They're actually starting to enjoy learning how their own ships work." Reed smiled. "Good. Because before this is over, they're going to need to understand every nut, bolt, and wire in their fleet. Sometimes going back to basics is the most advanced thing you can do." The rescue operation was working, but they all knew they were racing against time. The quantum storm was growing stronger, and they had hundreds of ships still to save. But as Reed watched his crew work alongside the Starborn, he saw something remarkable happening. Two species learning from each other, finding strength in their differences rather than division. "Captain," Jack's voice cut through the quiet hum of the Horizon's bridge. "Second quantum storm approaching from the outer system. It's 3 times larger than the first one." Reed rushed to the sensor station, Vale close behind him. The screen showed a massive swirl of energy heading straight for them. The already rescued ships hung safe at the edge of the area, but more than 200 Starborn vessels were still trapped in the original storm. "How long?" Reed asked, his voice tight. 8 hours until it hits. Maybe less." Jack's fingers flew over his console. "The 2 storms will merge. Anything caught between them." Vale's silver skin paled to an almost white color. "The combined energy would tear our ships apart." Reed hit the ship-wide comm. "Taurus, we've got a situation. Get back to the Horizon now." In Colony Ship 3's engine room, Torres looked up from her work. She and the Starborn engineers had just finished installing manual controls when the call came. "What's wrong?" "Second storm coming. Big one. We need a new plan. Fast." Torres turned to Bright and Swift. "Pack up. We're about to have a very interesting day." Back on the bridge, Reed and Vale were studying the storm patterns. The rescued ships had already begun moving further away under their own power, their crews now trained in manual operation. But the remaining fleet was still helpless. "The mining tethers won't work fast enough," Reed said, thinking out loud. "We need something bigger, something faster." Torres burst onto the bridge, her tool belt clanking. She took one look at the sensor display and let out a low whistle. "Well, that's not good." "Ideas?" Reed asked. Torres studied the display, her mind racing. "The storms are quantum energy, right? They disrupt advanced tech, but they're still energy. What if?" She turned to Vale. "Your ship's quantum drives. They're basically giant energy collectors." Vale nodded. "Yes, but they're useless in the storm. The energy is too chaotic." "Maybe not." Torres pulled up a diagram of the Starborn drive system. "What if we reverse them? Instead of collecting energy for propulsion, we make them collect the storm itself." "That's..." Vale started to object, then stopped. "Actually possible, but we'd need to control the drives manually. The automated systems would never handle it." "Good thing we just spent 2 days teaching your engineers how to do exactly that," Torres said with a grin. Reed looked at the countdown clock. 7 hours remaining. How many ships could we convert in time? "Maybe 20, Torres replied. "We'd position them in a circle around the fleet. When the second storm hits, they act like lightning rods, drawing in the energy and creating a safe corridor. And the corridor leads straight to us," Reed finished. "We can use the Horizon's tethers to pull the remaining ships out while the converted ships hold back the storm." Vale's skin rippled with concern. The crews on those 20 ships would be at extreme risk. "We'll volunteer," Swift said from the doorway. The young Starborn engineers stood with Bright and several others. "We've learned your ways. We can do this." Reed looked at Vale. "Your call, Admiral." Vale stood silent for a moment, then nodded. "Begin the modifications. I will go with the volunteer ships myself." The next 6 hours were a blur of activity. Torres led teams of human and Starborn engineers in converting the quantum drives. The volunteer ships moved into position, forming a ring around the trapped fleet. Every minute brought the second storm closer. "All ships report ready," Jack announced. "Storm approaching. Impact in 10 minutes." Reed watched the massive energy wave approach on his screens. Everything depended on this working. If they failed, they'd lose not only the remaining Starborn ships, but possibly the Horizon as well. "All ships, this is Captain Reed," he broadcast. "Remember your training. Keep to manual controls. Trust the basics." Vale's voice joined his. To all starborn vessels, today we learned that true wisdom means knowing when to put aside pride and embrace new ways of thinking. Or in this case, old ways. Follow the humans' lead. Trust in their experience. The storm loomed closer, its swirling energy filling their view screens. Reed gripped his chair's armrests. Years of rescue experience had taught him that the next few minutes would either be a miracle or a disaster. And in space, there was rarely anything in between. The second storm hit like a tidal wave of light and energy. The 20 converted starborn ships glowed bright as their reversed quantum drives began absorbing the chaos. On the horizon's bridge, every screen blazed with warnings. Dry ships holding position, Jack reported, his voice steady despite the tension. Energy absorption at 60% capacity and rising. Torres stood at her engineering station, watching the readings climb. The manual controls are working. They're actually doing it. Through the viewport, they could see the volunteer ships forming a barrier of light against the storm. Vale's voice crackled over the radio. "This is intense. How are the corridor readings?" Reed checked his displays. Corridor is forming. Energy levels down 30% inside the protected zone. He turned to Torres. "Time to test your theory. Launch the first tether." The Horizon's magnetic launcher fired, sending a thick metal cable into the protected corridor. It connected solidly with one of the trapped ships. Reed held his breath as they began to pull. "It's working," Jack exclaimed. "First ship is moving. No energy interference." Torres grinned. "Simple machines for the win. Physics doesn't care about quantum storms." But their victory was short-lived. A massive energy spike rocked one of the dry ships, sending it spinning. Alarms blared across the bridge. "Dry Ship 4 is losing containment," Jack reported. "Their energy absorption is failing." Vale's voice was tight with concern. "The manual controls are holding, but the hull can't take this much power. We didn't build our ships to handle this kind of strain." Torres grabbed her tool belt. "Captain, I need a shuttle. Now." Reed looked at her sharply. "You want to go out there? In that? Those hulls weren't designed for this, but I know what can strengthen them." She was already moving toward the door. "Remember those old reactor shielding plates we salvaged last month? They're not pretty, but they'll hold." Reed nodded. "Go, take whoever you need." Within minutes, Torres was leading a team of human engineers and starborn volunteers toward the struggling dry ship. Inside their shuttle, she laid out her plan. "We're going to bolt these plates directly onto their hull," she explained, pointing to the thick metal sheets. "It's not elegant, but it'll distribute the energy load. Bright, swift, your teams will help install them. Just like we practiced. Hand tools, basic mechanics." The work was dangerous and difficult. They had to spacewalk in the edges of the quantum storm, manually attaching reinforcement plates, while energy crackled around them. But the Starborn had learned well from their human teachers. They worked methodically, following Torres's lead, using simple tools and basic principles. "Hull integrity stabilizing," Jack reported from the horizon. "Dry Ship 4 is coming back online." Reed watched as more ships were pulled to safety through the protected corridor. "How long will those reinforcements hold?" "Long enough," Torres replied through her radio. "Sometimes a patch job is all you need to survive." The rescue continued hour after hour. The combined human and starborn teams moved with practiced efficiency, reinforcing dry ships as needed and pulling the trapped vessels to safety. What had started as an emergency solution was becoming a well-oiled operation. Vale watched from their ship as another group of vessels emerged from the storm. "I never thought I'd see my people working so well with manual tools. They seem to be enjoying it. There's something satisfying about working with your hands." Torres replied, tightening another bolt on a reinforcement plate. "Understanding the basics of how things work. Feeling the tools in your grip." "We had forgotten that," Vale admitted. "In our rush to advance, we lost touch with fundamental knowledge. This crisis has taught us much." As the last reinforcement plate was secured, Reed called from the horizon. Dry ships all showing stable. 50 more vessels to evacuate. We might actually pull this off. Torres looked out at the quantum storm still raging beyond their protective corridor. The combined human and starborn effort had created something unprecedented, a perfect blend of advanced technology and basic engineering principles working together to save lives. "Captain," she said, allowing herself a small smile, "I think we're going to need to update the rescue manual after this one." The storm continued to rage, but within their protected corridor, two civilizations worked as one, proving that sometimes the greatest innovations come from remembering the basics. "Last group of ships moving into position," Jack announced. The Horizon's bridge crew watched as the final cluster of starborn vessels lined up within the protected corridor. Outside, the merged quantum storms raged with incredible force, held at bay only by their makeshift barrier of converted dry ships. "Status of the dry ships?" Reed asked, his eyes fixed on the energy readings. "Holding steady," Torres replied from her station. "The reinforcement plates are doing their job. Vale's teams have gotten really good at maintaining the manual controls." The past 12 hours had been a constant cycle of careful coordination and quick fixes. Every time an energy spike threatened to break through, the combined human and starborn crews responded with practiced efficiency. What had started as an emergency response had evolved into something remarkable. Two species working in perfect harmony. Beginning final evacuation sequence, Reed announced over the fleet-wide channel. "Dry ships, maintain your positions. Rescue teams, stand by for tether deployment." Vale's voice came through clear and strong. "All starborn vessels, prepare for manual guidance. Remember your training. Trust in the basic principles we have learned." The Horizon's magnetic launchers fired in sequence, sending out their remaining tethers. Each cable found its target, connecting to the waiting ships with solid thuds that echoed through the hull. Torres watched the connection readings carefully. "All tethers secure," she reported. "Beginning pull sequence." The rescue vessel's engines roared to life, straining against the mass of the remaining fleet. Slowly, steadily, the trapped ships began to move. But space rarely makes things easy. "Energy spike," Jack shouted suddenly. "The storms are intensifying." Reed gripped his chair as the ship shuddered. "How bad?" "The storms are trying to merge completely," Torres said, her fingers flying over her console. "The pressure on the dry ships is increasing exponentially." Vale's transmission cut through the chaos. "Our hulls are holding, thanks to your reinforcements, but we can't maintain this barrier much longer. The energy is too strong." Reed looked at the distance remaining to safety. They were so close, but time was running out. Then Torres spoke up, her voice carrying that tone that meant she had an idea. "Captain, what if we stop fighting the merger? Let the storms come together, but use their own energy against them." "Explain," Reed and Vale said simultaneously. Torres pulled up a quick diagram. "The dry ships are already absorbing quantum energy. If we time it right, we can use the storm's own force to push the fleet out. Like riding a wave." "That would put incredible strain on the tethers," Reed noted. "Yes," Torres agreed, "but they only need to hold for about 30 seconds. Physics is still physics, even in a quantum storm." Vale's voice held a mix of concern and trust. "My dry ship crews are willing if you are, Captain Reed." Reed looked at his crew, saw the determination in their eyes. They had come too far to give up now. "All ships, prepare for emergency thrust. Dry ships on my mark, reverse your energy absorption by 15%. Let's use this storm to push us home." The next few minutes were tense as every ship got into position. The storms swirled closer together, their energy readings climbing higher and higher. At exactly the right moment, Reed gave the command. "Now." The dry ships adjusted their quantum collectors, and the storm's energy surged. Instead of fighting it, the fleet used the massive force to propel themselves forward. The tethers groaned under the strain, but held firm. "It's working." Jack exclaimed, all ships moving at increasing speed. Torres watched her readings carefully. 20 seconds to clear the storm boundary. Tethers at 90% capacity, but holding. The merged storm raged behind them as the fleet rode the wave of quantum energy. The dry ships maintained their precise control, guiding the surge rather than fighting it. In space, sometimes survival meant knowing when to work with the forces trying to destroy you. Finally, after what seemed like an eternity but was really less than a minute, the last ship cleared the storm's boundary. The protected corridor collapsed as the dry ships shut down their collectors, but it didn't matter anymore. They had made it. All ships accounted for, Jack reported, his voice filled with relief. We did it. We actually did it. Reed looked out at the rescued fleet, now safely gathered in normal space. What they had just accomplished would have been impossible for either species alone. But together, combining human ingenuity with starborn technology, they had achieved something extraordinary. Vale's transmission summed it up perfectly. It seems, my friends, that the most advanced technology of all is the ability to work together. 2 weeks after the rescue, the Horizon floated alongside the massive starborn command ship. The quantum storms had finally dissipated, leaving peaceful space in their wake. Inside the command ship's main hall, humans and starborn gathered for what Vale called a gratitude ceremony. Reed stood with Torres and his crew, feeling slightly out of place among the elegant architecture and advanced technology. But the starborn engineers, led by Bright and Swift, wore tool belts over their ceremonial robes, a sight that would have been unthinkable just weeks ago. Today marks a new chapter in our history, Vale announced, their silver skin gleaming under the soft lights. We came here as a proud species, convinced that our advanced technology made us superior. We leave humbled, but also enriched with knowledge we had forgotten was valuable. The Admiral gestured to the human crew. These humans, with their primitive technology and basic engineering principles, did more than save our fleet. They taught us a vital lesson about the danger of forgetting our foundations. Torres watched as Bright stepped forward, holding something in their hands. It was a simple wrench, but beautifully crafted from starborn metals, gleaming with an inner light. We created these tools, Bright explained, combining our material science with traditional human designs. Every ship in our fleet will now carry them, along with manual backup systems for all critical functions. Swift joined them, activating a holographic display. We're also establishing a new training program. All starborn engineers will now learn basic mechanical principles alongside quantum physics. Captain Reed, Chief Torres, we would be honored if your crew would help design the curriculum. Reed smiled, remembering how far they'd come from those first skeptical conversations. We'd be happy to help, though I hope you'll teach us a few things about quantum mechanics in return. A fair exchange, Vale agreed. After all, we've learned that true advancement comes not from abandoning the old ways, but from finding the perfect balance between past and future. The ceremony continued as both species shared stories and plans. The Starborn showed off their new hybrid systems, where advanced quantum technology worked alongside simple mechanical backups. Human engineers examined the improvements with interest, already thinking of ways to incorporate some of the ideas into their own ships. Later, in a quieter moment, Torres found herself working with Bright in one of the engineering bays. They were installing a manual override system, but this one was different. A perfect blend of human practicality and starborn innovation. You know, Bright said, tightening a bolt with their new wrench. Before this happened, we thought we had reached the peak of technological achievement. But working with your crew showed us that sometimes the simplest solution is the most elegant. Torres nodded, making a final adjustment to the system. And sometimes the most advanced thing you can do is remember the basics. Though I have to admit, these new tools of yours are pretty impressive. Back on the bridge, Reed and Vale were discussing the future. The star maps showed the Starborn fleet's path to their colony world, but now with new rescue stations planned along the route, joint operations between both species. Your people have changed our perspective forever, Vale admitted. Not just about technology, but about how we view other species. We thought less advanced meant less capable. We were wrong. Reed looked out at the fleet, seeing the changes already taking place. Ships now sported both quantum drives and backup chemical thrusters. Engineers carried tablets and wrenches. The merger of old and new, simple and advanced, was visible everywhere. We all have something to teach each other, Reed said. That's what makes space exploration worthwhile. As the ceremony concluded, the Horizon prepared to depart. They had other rescue missions to handle, other people to help. But they left behind more than just saved lives and improved technology. They left a legacy of cooperation, of finding strength in differences, and of remembering that sometimes the oldest wisdom is the most valuable. Vale's final message to the Horizon summed up everything they had learned. You came to our rescue with what we thought were primitive tools, but you gave us something far more precious, the understanding that true advancement means never forgetting where you came from and always being willing to learn from others. The Horizon turned toward their next mission, its crew knowing they had done more than just save lives. They had helped bridge the gap between two civilizations, proving that humanity's greatest strength wasn't in their technology, but in their ability to adapt, learn, and teach others to do the same.